and welcome back to another typings video. I'm your host and DM, Tom. I'm joined today with Lavix,
How you doing?
Tristan,
Hey.
Jordan,
Oh,
aka
hi
Denise.
there.
Oh, hi there, Brigadoon,
How's it going, guys?
and I think little David too.
Yep.
I just about murdered you. I'm not gonna
Yup.
lie.
My microphone was muted and I didn't realize it. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Don't worry, none of this conversation is gonna make it through the final cut.
Good.
All right. So we're going to be talking about ground, rock, and steel types today, the mineral trio. We're very lucky because we have a ground rock type trainer here with us today, which is pretty perfect when it comes to this conversation, that being Tristan. So we're going to be referring to him pretty heavily for the first two typings. He's not the most well-educated person when it comes to these, but he is naturally adapt to understand these typings, which is why, we're going to be bringing him in. So I feel like starting at ground is probably the best place to begin. Ground, rock, and then we'll go to refined steel, obviously. So a little background information on ground typing, and then we'll go from there. So ground typing, above all other things, they're patient. I've talked about ground typing in other videos, but ground types are patient beyond belief. They take a lot of abuse. And when I say a lot of abuse, I mean they're those type of people you can see getting walked on constantly. Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad typing. That just means they're incredibly resilient. As much damage as a ground type takes, it just keeps taking it, and it's fine with it. It accepts it and it moves on. Just like the way the earth gets walked on, the same way that you make quarries in the world, the way we mine it, the earth still just keeps on going even though we abuse it. And that's the way the ground type mentality stems from, is that ability to take the abuse and then keep moving on. Now, of course, that isn't the only mentality the ground type has. With ground types, you also have the ability to erupt. You have your earthquakes. Now, that only happens once the ground type is finally fed up. It may take a while. For examples in real life scenarios, it may take months for a ground type to hit this boiling point where they finally just break. And when they break, they break. Earthquake, landslides, mudslides, they are devastating. And so, with that kind of basic mentality in mind, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to ask Tristan here, Bub, you're the only person who's ever went through a ground type gym lesson, which is pretty remarkable considering we actually have a few ground types in the other Poke D&Ds. What are some things you learned from it, man? What are some insight you can give us? Being you've also been in quite a few Poke D&Ds, in all honesty, too.
Yeah, I find the ground training really helpful. It explained more about how a ground type actually fought. What was their mental reason to fight? Is it to advance further in life? No. As you've said, Tom, they are patient. They will go through a lot of shit. And they won't really get upset. Only
Well,
reason a ground type will fight, which I discovered, is to defend what their home, their family, their friends, something they view as theirs. This is something personal to me.
That's a very good explanation of it. Honestly, that's something I about forgot to mention, is that when you think about what would make somebody that patient who could take all that abuse to themselves break, what would actually be the thing to push them over the edge? And you saying that reminded me, it's not fucking with them. It's fucking with things that they care about, their home, their friends, their family. They're that kind of person that you can abuse all day and day out, but as soon as you start talking about something they care, that tectonic plate starts to slip a bit, and it keeps barely slipping until eventually it cracks, an earthquake. And if I'm right, that is something that they even covered in the ground gym training, was that kind of, this is their home. They fight best in their home. when they're surrounded by things they're comfortable with is when they're at their most effective abilities. And that kind of leads them to the point of, yeah, they're resilient, but even the strongest person is most comfortable surrounded by things they like.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's safe to say that, if a rock type was a person, he'd be that action hero in every movie.
mean ground
where it's
type.
Ground type. Be that person in every movie, be like, about to get shot in the face, totally okay with it. But then they punch his woman in the face, loses his shit.
Yeah, actually, that's a pretty good explanation. That's ground types for you. So, with that being said, we've only had a few other people who's ever had ground type Pokemon. One being Lavix. But that being said, Lavix is a primary water trainer, which means if anybody has a hand up against ground types, it would be Lavix. So that's why I'm going to bring in Lavix real fast to go ahead and give us some information. Lavix, we're going to talk about some of the ground type weaknesses after this story. What do you think are some of the weaknesses you've been able to find with ground types through your editions? I know for a fact that I'm pretty sure you fought Tristan at one time, if I do remember correctly.
Well, fighting and having a fight with them are different, because we were technically in different cities.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him a simple, little thing.
Oh,
We were going to meet up.
No. Are you going to start this? As this is
Now, this is a good example on how a water trainer is 4 times effective against a ground rock trainer. Because once I shattered him and eroded his ground, he's not fixed yet.
fucking water.
Well, please,
Yes.
please, Lavix. Please,
It's
Lavix,
safe.
tell us about this story. I need to hear it. At least the viewers should hear it.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Here we
What
go.
you need to know is that at one point I had a robot, and I didn't have it with me, but Tristan was near it, and all he had to do was simply tilt the mech on the dolly.
Right. No, he's taking this out of proportion a hell of a lot. No. Yes, no, he was at least 7 days away by bike, which we currently didn't have. And
It
how
was
the hell-
4.
It wasn't 4, it was 7.
It was 7.
Yeah.
Scumbag.
There you go.
I swear every time Tristan retells it, a day gets longer on the trail.
No, these guys are with me. 7. No,
That's the
that's by
case.
bike. That's if I was in perfect condition, which I wasn't, because I Oh, that's a different story. But I was basically physically wrecked. So I had to sit here on the phone and argue with this guy. This guy I met 2 days ago in storyline.
I'd give you 3 days. If
To throw it
anything.
out there, just for the viewer to understand, this phone argument from start to finish probably took up almost all of the session.
It was about an
completely.
hour and a half.
It was
real
like
life
an
time.
hour and a half. The
It
2
was
hours
a
of
legitimate,
them
yeah.
just
Oh.
arguing about tilting.
And this
a
entire time,
fucking mech.
He did not try it once.
I tried it once.
No,
No.
you
No,
didn't.
you didn't.
Didn't. That's the reason why this story
No.
continues on.
Right.
And that's why
Let's-
from this point on, I can say one word and cause a mudslide.
Right. Before we go
What's
fucking
up?
off the track here, I would like to also mention that thing was attracting lightning.
That's because I was shooting lightning at you from the other city.
And
Which is
this is why I
absolutely
didn't want to
uncalled for.
touch the mech.
I mean, I really don't like being struck by lightning, but that happened several times during that session because of Lavix's
Hey,
absolute.
Tom?
And this brings me on to my other pet hate. Fucking ghost types.
Oh,
Right.
That's
That is-
racist.
So,
we're getting
God.
no, that's typist.
All right,
That's a
all right.
difference.
Yeah.
Hold on a
Tom?
second. Yes, Denise.
do you feel that static building up in the back
I'm
of your
feeling a
neck?
bit of static
Oh, The
personally.
hairs in the back of my neck.
All right. So
Red
I'll
tremor?
go ahead and end the argument here because I can see it. I can see it going a bit longer
Hold
than this
Hold-
this video should be. Go
Hold
ahead,
on, I
what,
just-
Denise?
Just before we end this argument, Lavix, you were
Yes.
talking about, shattering his rock and eroding his ground.
Yep.
But let's face it, we all know you shattered the valves of his heart and eroded his arteries.
to kind of inform you guys, of course, the story will be fully covered in the stories series, so I highly suggest you go check out that one. But to make a long story short, because of Lavix's constant shocking and bullshit from Ghost Pokemon, he ended up causing Tristan to blow out an artery, and it ended up also causing mental damage because of oxygen oxygen depravity,
And erectile dysfunction.
and erectile dysfunction because of the lightning damage eroding his nerves. So Lavix kind of truly 100% fucked Tristan on this thing. Of course, that being said, water type versus ground rock type.
Some would say it was like 400% more effective than it should have been.
Oh
Just-
god, it was so beautiful.
Some would say
though.
the perfect combination of water ghost electric.
Boswell
Completely
did.
fucked him.
Just be grateful that I had to pull out of that campaign, or I was coming after you.
What were you gonna do? Like mumble at him and go?
You guys are so mean.
Oh
I only
god.
need one goal.
I must break you. Lavix
Alright.
just like squirts a water pistol at him.
All right. Anyways, let me go on here so we don't
Yeah.
get too derailed. We do have two other typings past this one to cover.
Oh really? I thought it was a one-time video. Come
Oh
on,
god,
then.
it might as well be at this point. We could go on hours
Welcome
about
to
this.
the roast of Tristan.
Welcome to the Pokedandy roast of Tristan. I'm your host, Tom.
I want to know when these
Tristan, I heard somebody earlier say you're glad that you pulled out. If only your father had that same idea.
Oh, that's so mean.
Oh god, it
I
is a
just wanna
roast.
know.
Anyways,
I
back
just-
to the whole point of it. I know I'm gonna stop you right there. You know why?
Why?
I don't
Because
know.
you
I
can.
feel because I can, and you're my PA, Denise.
Fine. Don't worry about it.
All right. Anyways, so ground has three natural weaknesses, and it actually has an immunity and also a immunity when it attacks. I'll explain that here in a second. It's naturally weak to ice, grass, and water, while its attacks are completely neutralized by a flying type. Of course, they themselves are immune to electric, which of course you can check out in the previous video to understand why that happened. Link will be somewhere on the screen at this point. With ice type, physiologically speaking, you freeze the ground, you make it harder for the ground to move. If the ground isn't used to how it naturally can work and you freeze it and you make more resistance, the ice is gonna obviously create a bit of resistance for the ground. The ground's not gonna be able to move the way it's supposed to. You freeze ice together in a block. Tell me how you're gonna make a sandstorm or a sand tomb. It's just not gonna work. It's all about setting it in stone, or in this case in ice. You go to grass, of course. Grass works its entire life breaking through ground. I mean, a plant can't survive unless it can literally go through ground like it's water. The roots go deep. I mean, the trees go deep into the ground, Saruman. I mean, like that's kind of how they work in their physiological point. Why wouldn't grass Pokemon be super effective against ground when they can just cut through it the way their roots do?
One
And
thing
of
that I'd like
course-
to mention,
Go
if
ahead.
that's okay. It's also with the, if you look at Pokemon that ground types that dig through the ground, if it's permafrost and it's frozen, I don't know if anybody's ever tried to dig through dirt when it's like 30 below. It's like virtually impossible. So how's a Pokemon able to survive in its natural environment when the environment's actually now a hostile environment?
That's a very good point, and it just kind of alludes more to the fact that the ice typing is just taking its home away from it. It's being cold and it's being like, oh, you thought you were safe, but you're not actually. Good luck trying to dig through frozen ground.
Yeah.
All right, so we
God.
go to water, and of course, I've explained it by this point. Water erodes away the ground. Look at the way rivers work. Look at the way the ocean works. Look at the way. Just look how water affects the earth
Yeah.
in general, and you can see obviously how water is going to be effective against ground.
Don't
Now,
forget free flow.
free flow, and flow, and God, I'm in a musical mood tonight.
You really are.
I am. All right, so now ground type moves are ineffective on flying types, and a lot of people have a hard time understanding this. At least in my understandings with it, I don't quite see the problem with people understanding this, because take it from this point of view, right? This perspective. Most ground type moves are based off of the ground. So they're either going to fire from the ground or they deal with the ground getting into a somewhat area of effect ambient state like a sandstorm. Even in that case, a gust of wind can just fuck it horribly. If you throw a rock at if you throw sand at a bird, it's not going to travel as fast as a rock. That's just the way physics work. It's not going to be too horrifically large that the bird can't, ignore it and just fly around it. It just makes sense that a bird is going to have the agility, just like when we were talking about fighting types in a previous video. They're going to have the agility and speed to be able to just avoid the attack. And that's how I can kind of see in a physical sense why flying types are immune to ground type moves. And of course, we all can understand why ground's going to be immune to electric. You can sit there and hit the ground with lightning bolts time after time after time after time. It's still just ground. You're not really affecting it. You put that electric type personality beside the ground type, and he's like, "Look at that cunt," you know. So
Sorry, Denise.
no
No
offense,
problem.
Denise.
It's fine.
Of course.
It's fine. Please do continue.
All right. So with those kind of weaknesses said, Tristan and Lavix, because Lavix, you have had ground types before. I mean, your favorite Pokemon, at least from my knowledge, when it comes to ground types, is a Mudkip. And in one of the D&Ds, you even have a Mudkip who's somewhat deformed and is allergic to water. So he's a pure ground type, if anything, Kipler. You both just kind of tell me, what are some things you learned about training ground types? Actually, David, too, you can come into this. You had a Gibble at one point, and you were training him. So
Yeah,
you
that
three,
was a sad day.
Oh, yeah, it was. You'll find out why that's a sad day once again in the stories series. So you three, just kind of talk to me. What are some good training tips you guys would give to a viewer if they were trying to pick up a ground type Pokemon?
Some of the things I've learned with my Geodude recently is that they're not like psychic types. If you give them a complicated command, they will just not understand it. It's too complex. It's too out there. Like
One might say they're as dumb as a box of rocks.
We're not in rock type yet.
Hey,
That was a box of dirt.
Gosh, David.
fine. Excuse me. I'll just leave.
yes.
My buddy
So
just left
the
her
way
channel.
I've found to do it is you just combine a bunch of simple commands you've taught them. You basically tie in. You cause your ground type to create a pit in the earth. You then get your ground type to go into it, close it off, and then start to kick up a bunch of sand. Then while it's in that protection, away from things that might distract it, might attack it, it can start to create a sandstorm or some other such move. Simple steps to get a complex sequence will help you.
And at least for
good example,
combat
Tristan.
wise,
No,
at
go
least
ahead.
for combat wise, training Kipler, the pure ground type Mudkip, he makes the most of what he can do with the dirt because if someone's far off, like a flying type, obviously he can't shoot water if he's allergic to water. So what you do is you bring them down to where you are, find a way to get the bird to the ground, and then you take the ground and you just fuck it. Like
Just like that.
Yeah. Because if you can get them
Jesus.
underground as a ground type, your chances of winning are very high. Because not a whole lot of Pokemon can just go through dirt as easy as a ground type.
True. I mean,
Yeah.
David, that's a pretty good example of your Gibble right there, going through ground as if it's nothing more than water.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, it's definitely the ground type strength, as I was just touching on. It's just the using their home as a as the home field advantage. Realistically,
Well, I'll go ahead and throw it out there. Because, with Professor Tom here, Mr. Biology, I'm going to go ahead and ask, when a ground type generally goes through dirt the way it does, it's very fluid, it's kind of like swimming through water for, water type Pokemons. How exactly, what are the main groups of how they do it? I'm just interested.
Well, that mainly depends on the physiology of the ground type itself. Certain ground types can't swim through the earth as easy as other ones. I mean, you look at a gibble versus like a geodude. The gibble is pretty much a land shark, and so it's going to go and it's going to swim through the earth, and it's going to swim through it in much the same sense of a shark swimming through the water. It's going to use its little hands to kind of claw itself. It's going to use its little feet to kind of paddle, and the way its body is shaped is going to be able to allow it to have that ground move over it. Now, the reason it can move that hard is just because, well, it's a dragon type also, so the amount of power it has is, incredibly high. You put that juxtaposed to a Geodude, it's not really the most form fitting to dig through the ground. It isn't really the most form fitting to dig anywhere, honestly. I mean, that's why you usually see Geodudes lying around, not really in the ground. So I'd go ahead and say it depends on the physiology of the ground type. I mean, like for example, a Sandslash is another great example. A Sandslash looks a lot like I'd anticipate that they dig through the ground a lot like a mole would. They use their claws very sharp to sit there and kind of claw out ahead of them as they pull themselves through and manage to move themselves at a higher speed with their feet.
Yeah.
It you combine that type of body that's already decided on, or rather already evolved to go through ground, along with the natural instincts of them being a ground type and already being, in that disposition to go into the ground, and along with their habitual knowledge where I've lived my entire life in the ground, you compile all those different reasons up, and what you're going to get is you're going to get a Pokemon who knows just the perfect way to swim through dirt, the perfect way to deal with a rock that comes in front of them whenever they have to dig through the ground. You're dealing with a Pokemon that knows perfectly how to dig. And that's what ground types have going for them. They know perfectly how to dig, and that's why ground type moves can get a stab bonus, at least in my world. No other Pokemon is going to know how to deal with ground better than a ground Pokemon. No Pokemon is going to know how to dig better than a ground type Pokemon. And that's just the truth of it.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with that answer. I was just asking because I was recently looking at the StarCraft 2 lore, and I was thinking about the roaches. They like vibrate like crazy when they dig. How to go for the run, so.
And of course, if you have a Sandslash face, it's like something like a Colossus. And, while your Sandslash is out there, you have a bunch of Void Rays that came in from behind and started to attack your drones at the back of your base.
No.
I mean, at that point, you just gotta have to hope for a nice sandstorm, at least with some infestors.
I mean, you have
Or Baneling Rush.
I mean, you have to also ask yourself, what Pokemon would be a drone, really?
Bug types.
Dunsparce.
Good
Dunsparce.
choice.
Yeah.
Good choice.
Great.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now that was actually a really good question. Any other training tips you three might want to give for ground types before we try to mosey on over to the rock typing?
Yes, just patience. Is this the biggest thing? But I say you could probably have that with almost any type of training, but just more specifically patience with them.
They're not going to get what you say straight off. It may take time just for you to sit there, explain several times, or just to think of a different method. Say, when I was training with my Geodude, it was better if I physically showed him what I wanted. And he could, once he has the idea of what you want him to do, he can think about how he will do it himself.
Of course, because just because they're ground type doesn't mean they're stupid. They just have a harder time picking something up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes,
if you're
exactly.
willing to work with that, I mean, that's why Tristan, I had to bring you in. You understand that better than anybody else at this point.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
All right. Well, I feel pretty happy about that ground type conversation. It was short, but it was to the point, which is good.
Still better than nice.
All right. So now we're gonna go ahead and go on to rock typing, and well, with rock typing, oh boy, let me tell you a little bit of background information about rock types before we enter into the conversation. Of course, we'll be talking with Tristan about rock type since he is secondary rock typing. Rock types are they're not as patient as ground typings, but they are more resilient to just damage. For example, a ground type takes all the damage, but it doesn't care. While a rock type is just resistant to certain kinds of damage, while at the same time certain it can shatter, it can break much more easier than the ground can. A rock typing is going to have that mentality of you can sit there and you can hit me and you can hit me and you can hit me and it just doesn't fucking matter to me until you finally crack it, and then it's like shards of rock going everywhere. It's a destructive manner. I mean, look at the fact that most rock types, at least from my understanding, can learn explosion, which is a pretty devastating move we can all agree on. That's the kind of mentality of a rock type. It'll take shit and it'll take shit and it'll take shit until you fracture it, then it explodes. And what do you got left? You've got a dead rock type and you've got its opponent dead, because that's the type of vindication a rock type goes for. Now, Tristan, you've had a Geodude, which is pretty much the epitome of you in this world. And you haven't been to a rock type gym. No one's actually been to the rock type gym or even took a class from the rock type gym, which is of course a very interesting concept. So I'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to you guys for a second. Anybody who has had a rock type Pokemon, what are some things you've learned or thought, if you guys can even think of any? I mean, you guys are pretty uninformed when it comes to rock types, just like you were with grass types. All right. So with rock types, a few things I would honestly give for some things people need to know about them. Rock types are gonna be resilient, but at the same time, it's not gonna hurt you to find out what that breaking point is for them. They're gonna have that shatter point. They're gonna have that level of damage they can take emotionally and physically before they actually break. And so, just like ice types and other typings with that kind of weird fragility to them, you're gonna need to know their weaknesses. So, what I would honestly say with a bit of information about rock types is that you're always going to want to go ahead and you need to find out their weaknesses. Now, rock types aren't the smartest. They're about the same intelligence level as a ground type. And so you're not going to be able to be like, hey, Geodude, what makes you break down into 1,000 pieces and cry to a John Mayer song? You're not going to be able to say that to it. Well, you can say it to it, but you're not going to get an answer. So you're going to have to sit there and observe it. As funny as it is to be able to learn about your rock type and be able to use it effectively, you're going to have patience, because it's going to be a slow process of learning that Pokemon, being able to understand that Pokemon, being able to be its friend. And so I'd say that that's a pretty good bit of information right on, at least when it comes to training them. Now rock types have a few weaknesses. They have, actually, when I say a few, they have quite a bit. They have a weakness to fighting, grass, ground, steel, and water. That's an ungodly amount of weaknesses, honestly. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go through these quickly since they have 5 weaknesses, and honestly, all their weaknesses are pretty obviously. Fighting, if there's a Pokemon that can punch hard enough to break a rock, it's going to be a fighting type. That's the honest to God truth. And personality, mentality type point of view, a fighting type is going to self improve. So even if the rock type is stronger or more resilient than the fighting type, that fighting type is going to keep coming back and coming back until eventually it can break that rock. You put it against a grass type, and once again, grass Pokemon are incredibly resilient. They live their entire lives fighting against adversity, and so you put them against a rock, and they look at it nothing more than a stronger ground type, and through a matter of time, they'll break it through. Look at lichen and things of that nature in the grass world, and see them turning rock into dirt and then feeding off of the nutrients into the dirt. You can obviously see the physiological point of view. You put it into a mental point of view, and you're like, okay, how is that social networking type of thing that a grass type can go against a rock type? Well, rock types are notorious for communicating with each other. You have a bunch of rocks together, and they're just a bunch of rocks together. They're not a herd of rocks or a group of rocks. So you put a bunch of grass types against a bunch of rock types, and the amount of communication between those grass types versus those rock types is going to be different. And of course, communication during battle is a very important thing. Communication during life is a very important thing, and so you can see the superiority of the grass type versus the rock type. I mean, rocks are in the ground. The rocks can get shifted by ground. Rocks get moved around by the ground. Caves themselves are just tunnels in the ground in which rocks inhabit. It's just an aspect of the ground's the rock's home. And if you try to argue that the rock can manage to deal with its home, you're just not understanding it correctly. Even a mountain that is the apex of, a giant rock is still mainly ground. So of course the ground type's going to have control over the rock, at least moving it around, especially when, a rock type throws a rock in front of the ground type and it's like, oh, I've had to dig through this before. Steel's obviously harder, and we'll get into steel after this, so I'm not going to cover it too terribly bad, but I'll say this about it. You throw a rock at a giant piece of steel, the rock breaks. That's the truth of it, too. Steel's just harder than a rock, and so it doesn't matter how hard that rock fights, it's going to break itself on that steel, and if it doesn't break itself, it's going to break itself the time after that, or maybe it even takes a third hit for it to break, but it's going to break. It's not going to be able to deal with that steel type. And of course, you got water erosion, those are things of that nature. You've got a tide bumping up against the cliff, constantly breaking it down over years and years and years. The rock type doesn't even get to shatter at this point to try to get revenge. It just slowly gets worn away, which we can see, with that happening with Lavix messing with Tristan, obviously, through that story. Now, if you had to give a training tip about rock types, just what's one tip you might give to the viewers, Tristan?
Never, never underestimate them. You will look at it and you will start to wonder what is, as you said, Tom, you need to find the breaking point, but never underestimate it. Wait until you see your rock type start to fracture. If it doesn't look like there's a problem, roll with it. Let your rock type show you how far it can go before it starts to fracture. As you said, you need to find its parameters.
So,
Pretty good advice there. Yeah, yes, Denise, yes.
seeing we're talking about tips and such, I'm going to throw out a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, you take your rock type, and you know how important to, any biological creature its diet is, right? For us, healthy diets are incredibly important. And, most rock types, what do they eat? Probably rocks, right?
Pretty good, yeah.
So, what happens if you change that diet into metals that you find from the ground, iron, stuff like that, zinc, all that kind of jazz?
Now this is my own personal opinion, and I have a bit of proof to back it up, and I call it the metal coat effect, and I'm gonna use that onyx as my example here. You give an onyx metal coat, it evolves into a steelix, right? Now, I firmly believe if you give a rock type metal to eat, it depends on the rock type's power to be able to digest and even eat that metal. Is its rock hard enough, or are you giving that Pokemon metal in a small enough form for it to be able to digest? If it can digest it, you have a high possibility of making that rock type a steel type. If it can't, it's the same thing as feeding us. It's the same thing as feeding you plastic, grass, things you just can't digest.
So, let's just continue doing this while we're still here. So, you're feeding your rock type, the right increments, sizes, and shapes for it to be able to digest, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get it to evolve. How does its psyche change if it does? Because you're going from, a rock type which is weak to steel. That seems like a pretty big, personality difference from typing alone. Do we retain the same personality from first evolution, or do we see major changes?
You see major changes, and the reason is because the brain that rock type has, because every Pokemon has to have a brain. That's just the way it works. A sentient creature has to have some type of cerebral cortex. It has to have some type of brain that it can function in. Whether or not that brain's made of flesh, rock, crystals, highly conductive minerals, or just the etherealness of a ghost, and those energies linking together in certain synapses, you're gonna have some type of center of conscious. And when you do that and you take a rock type, you turn it to a still type, majority of the time you're gonna either have a rock still type or it's gonna become a still type. And when that, if it's a pure still type, you can expect that Pokemon to go, okay, now its synapses are made of metal. Metal's much more conductive. Metal's much more pliable in certain circumstances. Essentially, what you've done is you've taken the brain and you have altered it completely just based on its own composition. And so the way the brain works, you change the brain, you change the personality. I mean, I hate to be dark in this point, but you can see that happening when people become vegetables. If the brain's altered, you change the personality, and the same thing goes for a Pokemon. If you change its brain enough, you're going to alter its personality. And that's how I kind of see rock types that evolve into still types changing. That's how you can see the difference in personality when a rock type becomes a still type, the same way you can see the difference in a personality between a person who had a concussion and a person who didn't have a concussion, or a person who was in a car wreck and a person who wasn't in a car wreck if the car wreck was more severe. It's the same type of difference when it comes to the brain.
And to cap it all off, nice simple question on my part here. What types do you think would actually get along best with a rock type?
Types to get along with best with a rock type. Well, obviously, ground types. Ground types are gonna get along pretty great with rock types, and that's just based off the fact that ground types aren't overtly offensive, and ground types aren't, or rock types aren't overtly offensive. Ground types aren't overtly offensive. You put two Pokemon that just want to kind of exist and have nice times together, and you're gonna have a nice family. I mean, look at the way ground types and rock types naturally exist together and how much they don't try to mess with each other. And you can just see, obviously, that's going to be a great relationship. Now, that being said, there are a few relationships that can exist with rock types that are going to seem kind of weird, but at the same time, it's going to be beneficial for the rock type. I'd give a kind of a odd man out type of scenario to flying types to rock types, honestly. And the reason I say this is because rock types are effective against flying types, but at the same time, a flying type isn't seeking to try to overtly attack the rock type. A flying type isn't trying to be offensive to the rock type, and a rock types are patient. And if you're patient enough, you can see the true intentions of somebody. And so a rock type with a flying type will eventually be able to sit there and say, oh, you're not trying to piss me off. That's just who you are. I can deal with that. And if a rock type can deal with it, a rock type can make friends with it. Because that's the point of rock types and ground types. They're friendly Pokemon. They're patient enough for them to be able to make friends with things they really shouldn't be able to. A rock shouldn't make friends with a flying type, but at the same time, a bird makes its nest on a cliff. It's just how the world works, and it's how a rock type can actually go against. So, or go for. So I'd say a flying type would be the kind of the odd man out that no one expect a rock type to actually get along with. Outside of course, ground typing, which is the obvious answer.
Mhm.
All
We
right,
touched-
so yeah, go ahead.
we touched a bit on the ground type's weaknesses and strengths. Ground type, rock.
Yeah,
Forgive
there
me.
you go.
Now, there's the obvious ones that are present in the game, but how would, say, a rock type who works with the environment around it, the same as a ground type, how would they deal with a ghost type which edits the world around it to suit it? How
Well,
would it deal with something that's ethereal but still solid?
that's not a that
That's a
depends on
pretty
the.
pointy question.
I was gonna say that's mainly based on the rock type and the trainer itself. You see, you go ahead and you answer a few questions for me with this question. How does the environment handle a Pokemon that handles the environment? If a ghost
Given.
Pokemon can change your perception of the environment, and it can change the ground type's perception of the environment, how is that ground type going to be able to fight that ghost type? Sure, you're not going to have natural weaknesses there. But that being said, a lot of, the original ghost types in the world had levitate.
Mhm.
And
That's
rocks,
ghastly.
exactly. And rock is just a harder but more fragile form of a ground type, and levitate makes you immune to ground type moves. So if you can kind of transfer that line of thought to the rock type, you can kind of see ghost types don't really have a lot to fear, and it's really going to have to come down to the thinking of that type of trainer. Now, I won't give too much information on this just because you guys are in Poke D&D and you guys are playing it. And I'm not going to try to give you handicaps on each other, since one of the other Poke D&Ds that's not the recorded one has all of these people you've heard through these typing videos playing against each other in teams to see who can be the best team. I won't give too much information against how a rock type can fight a ghost type, but I'll just kind of leave it at that for you there, Tristan.
What?
Listen,
Actually, that
you're
will
not
give
going to
me
learn how to beat
something.
me.
What I'm
I
going to
will.
throw out there as well is that you've got two types of Pokemon that want to control the environment, and they do so in different ways. Ghosts change your perception of the environment and try to change the environment to better suit them, whereas, rocks will just, maybe try and kick up Sandstorm or something like that.
Mhm.
I think what'll happen when a ghost and a rock fights, the ghost, you're talking about how the ghost might have maybe some sort of natural advantage due to rocks being like ground types and the sun and things like that there. I'm going to have to disagree, and I'm going to straight up say that I think it's going to be a matter of the power of the Pokemon. If a rock type is strong enough to physically control the environment, it comes down to a battle of dominance just over the environment itself, rather than the Pokemon having a back and forth like in most normal battles.
I think I see where you're going there. If the ground type is strong enough, it might be able to. It might not perceive where the ground is, but it can feel it. It's like it is still part of the ground and the rock. Is that what you're getting at there?
Yeah, basically, I'm just trying to say, it's all about, whichever Pokemon can better manipulate the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, a ghost's manipulation of the environment can only go so far, And then again, so can a rock type, so again, it's just her vying for dominance and control of the environment in different fashions.
Mm-hmm. The ghost type is trying to take away the home advantage, while the ground and rock type is trying to keep it.
Yeah, basically.
All right.
That'd be very interesting.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm not commenting on it too much. Just saying that is an interesting thought. I haven't really thought of it that way.
Mhm.
Because you're right. I think what Jordan was touching on. If there's it does take a lot of energy for a ghost type to be able to do what it does, and it obviously has a very limited amount of energy to do so. Where a ground type doesn't need to, it is the same way that we move our muscles, we get tired. It doesn't, risk dying for just overdoing it in that regard. Where a ghost Pokemon will end its life because its power is based off, how much life force it has, and so if that ground type can just maintain control and be like, you have to exude more energy than you possibly have to be able to take control, then yeah, definitely. Then at that point, the ghost Pokemon's like, well, this isn't worth it. I
It's
can't do it.
It's a lot like a stall team in traditional Poke battling.
Yeah, I think
Right.
it's safe to say, just to touch on what Tristan said, because, when we were first talking about this whole rock v ghost situation, it really sounded like you were counting them out, but definitely with what Tristan said, never count out a rock type, Don't underestimate them, because they can really, they can really make a comeback, or they can really hang on through that kind of fight. So
I mean, they are resilient. They're part of the mineral trio, the three most resilient types imaginable. I mean, that's a good point there, Jordan, and that's a great point, Tristan. So I feel that we've covered rock types pretty well, honestly, at this point, and I feel like we should move on. Still types. Now, Tristan, unfortunately, he's not like a pure tri-type ground rock still, so he isn't somebody we're going to be able to go back to. But we do have a still type in the channel today.
Yeah, that's right. It's me, obviously.
Obviously, Denise, obviously. Nah, it's going to be Brigadoon here, our fighting still type champion.
No big deal.
No big deal, no hard thing to come by. So what we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to give a little bit of background information on still types, and then we'll go ahead and go into the discussion. With still types, you have a pretty strong mentality of I'm going to be the best. Now, when I say I'm going to be the best, they're not going to work extremely hard to change themselves or improve themselves, rather. Instead, what you're going to be getting is you're going to be getting a Pokemon that redistributes its strength to make up for its weaknesses. You're going to get a malleable Pokemon who's able to go, okay, I've got this incredible high defense. I once gave an example to David about the still type mentality, and it went a little bit like this. You say you're stronger than me. There's no fucking way I'll get stronger than you. You say you're tougher than me. That's fucking ridiculous. I'm always gonna be tougher than you. You say you're faster than me. Well, you might have that, but try to beat me down. It's one of those type of mentalities. They're gonna feel like they're the best, and that's because they keep changing themselves to try to be the best, not improving themselves, but redistributing their power. Now, that being said, with a still typing, you also have the kind of this odd nobility mentality that happens, which is only can you truly realize if you're strong when you face an opponent that's worthy of testing you. That's not a natural form of nobility in the Pokemon. That's themselves conforming to the nobility aspect in order to see if they're truly strong. Now, with that being said, David, I'm just gonna stop there because you've been in quite a few D&Ds as I've talked about before, and you are a secondary still typing. Of course, your still typing's been kind of up for debate recently since you've realized when you get a fire typing and how that happens. Why don't you go ahead and you just tell me a few things about still typings that you've encountered?
It's actually one of the something I'm still in the process of kind of understanding about myself and just understanding with my Pokemon. I sometimes will cross over certain ideas or certain thought processes that I think that come from a steel typing, but realistically, it's kind of being splashed with fighting and things like that. I can definitely appreciate the idea of I am the best. There is nobody stronger than I am or faster than I am. And even if somebody is technically faster, it's like, well, that's cool that you can run around me in circles, but you're not going to crack me. I mean, that's a cool trick. And so that I understand that completely. And I've just been trying to learn more every time that we do a battle or we do training or I see how they like to behave in the wild. And it's been good so far, but I actually feel pretty inept at speaking on it, other than the fact that I know they're very strong, they're very powerful. I definitely seek out Steel-type Pokemon because they're my second favorite, first being my Dragon that I said on the last video. And I just love their sheer power. If you look at the resistances they have, unless you bring in the right Pokemon to the fight, Steel types are super hard to beat. They are one of the highest physically defensive Pokemon that you can have as well. And so even if a Steel type is at odds with something that's even a tier above it, it still has a pretty good chance because of its sheer innate ability to be strong. And I'm really drawn to that. And I like that mentality where it's like I can hang with the best. I may not be the best right now, but I will be.
I have to say, as a normal trainer, I find myself, I definitely have a lot of respect for steel types in the fact that I feel like I can relate due to their, kind of, hey, you think you're, stronger than me, I'm going to adapt in that, I'm going to be stronger than you kind of idea, the whole malleable idea of a steel type. I definitely think that's something I can relate to from my stance, and it's something that's just pretty fucking cool, honestly. It's almost like,
Yeah, I'm really drawn to that as well. Just the fact that they have that. It's just they're just awesome. I mean, I'm just gonna put it. Maybe it's biased, but I just think they're just absolutely cool. They're strong. They're tough. There's not much you can really do unless you bring the right tools to the fight.
yeah, that's definitely true. Uh, I will say, yeah, there's no two ways about it. That's definitely just 100% true. Unless you have fire type and the right tools, try and or just the natural weaknesses, the what steel types are, you're just gonna have problems with them. To be honest, there's no two ways about
You
it.
might have a bad
Especially
time.
if you're a physical striker, you're just gonna have problems all day all night.
One of the reasons why I enjoy them as steel fighting type trainer, and those are the Pokemon I come across because up close and personal is the way they do things. Not only do can they take a hit, but if they can punch really good too, it's like, well, goodness, how the heck am I supposed to compete with this guy? I mean, he's a steel guy that has fists. Like Lucario is one of my favorite Pokemon.
All right, so that's some good information right there. Now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna go and talk about some of the steel type weaknesses. And steel types really only have three weaknesses, one of which, or rather, they also have one immunity, that immunity being to poison, which of course is the last video in this series. Steel types are weak to fire, fighting, and ground. Now, of course, once again, ground is the home in which steel ore lives. Same reason that rock's weak to ground is the same reason that steel's weak to ground. An earthquake can shatter steel. I mean, look at the way bridges are flimsy when an earthquake hits. Look at the way pipes get shredded whenever earthquakes hit. When a ground type snaps, it destroys everything. And when it destroys everything, it definitely destroys things that are held within it. A fire type, I mean, steel's malleable when it's heated up. Answer solved. I mean, there you go. Fighting types are the kind of the more interesting point of view. When I say that, fighting types, you're going to go ahead and you're going to get a Pokemon that tries to keep improving itself. Now, the same way fighting is effective against rock is the same way fighting is effective against steel. It may take it longer than it will rock, but it will eventually punch a hole through that steel plate. It just might lose a bit more before it gets to that point. Now, with the immunity to poison, it comes all along the lines of you can't poison something when it has literal flesh of steel. You're not going to be able to have something that affects, flesh or something more fragile than steel. You're not going to have something that can affect something more fragile than steel that can affect steel itself. I mean, it sounds kind of redundant, but it's the truth of it. Steel's a very hard typing. It's a very resilient typing. It's not resilient. It's more protective in its nature. And so poison typing, you're just not going to be able to get to it. Mentality wise, poison typing can be very deceptive. You get a typing that isn't going to try to outreach its own abilities. Instead, it's going to try to change its abilities to fit the situation. And so it's not going to try to put itself in a situation to where it's going to be right for the taking. That poison type isn't going to be able to mislead it because it's not going to go anywhere. It's still where it is. It's just changed its form, which is how I kind of see poison typing being, immune, or rather steel typing being immune to poison. Now, with steel typing Pokemon, I'll say this about them, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Brigadon for any training tips for the people who might be viewing this. Steel types have a very weird beauty to them, and I say that because they're very bestial looking creatures. They're not really the prettiest, but at the same time you look at them, you go, that is the apex of efficiency. There's something beautiful to be said when you look at a Pokemon, you go, that is an efficient Pokemon. That Pokemon is meant to get the job done, and it's meant to get the job done effectively and with the shortest amount of time. Look at a Magneton, right? It's an electric steel type Pokemon. That Pokemon is literally just 3 fucking Magnemites, but you know what? It's effective at what it does. It's amplified its abilities, it's increased its power, it can go in, it can get the job done. Look at a Mawile. That Pokemon's in a cave. It's trying to get fed. What's it do? It decides it's going to pretend like a little girl. It's going to cry to lure trainers to it. And when the trainers come to see why this little girl's alone in the cave, it eats. It is effective and it is resilient. I mean, it's in a damn cave after all. You can imagine the amount of Pokemon it has to deal with on a daily basis. Put on top of that the fact that you can see steel types mainly underground, and one of the most abundant Pokemon in caves are kind of be Zubats, which are a poison typing. You can kind of understand why a steel type might grow an immunity to poison type Pokemon. So, go ahead.
I was gonna say one thing that I want to touch back with all the weaknesses of steel typing, and this is just my own personal opinion, is that one reason whenever I've ever fought other ground type trainers, I feel like they adjust to the situation a lot faster than I can, and therefore that's the reason why I'm never able to beat them and why I'm weak to them, because they can adjust their strengths so quickly, because I mean it's their home, it's their environment, of course they're going to know that better than I can, and so I'm always playing catch up, I'm playing adjusting the entire time. If I'm always on the defensive, I'm never going to be on the offensive, and I just end up just being wear down. I mean, the same way that the ground melts rock and metal all the time. It just slowly applies pressure, heat, until finally collapses and it just becomes one with the earth. And then going back to the immunity of poison, I feel like poison is meant to affect flesh, when steel is not even that. It's a mineral. It's an ore. And so you just have 2 types. You have a weapon that's not even designed to, for this, dealings. The armor that it is, kind of like taking a pistol to a tank. You just brought the wrong weapon to the fight, realistically.
That's very true, honestly. I mean, honestly, that would take off the training tips too, honestly, from you, because that's a very good training tip for people to be able to understand. You're gonna be great against poison types. You need to understand that, and you need to be able to realize that that's probably a good thing for you to be able to train on.
I would like to say is that and this is actually a really good idea. Sometimes with a steel type mentality, and you always are constantly trying to be the best, and adjust to fit the situation, and so that way you are just the apex of whatever needs to happen. Whenever you're naturally immune or resistant, you don't need to have a flawless victory. You then open yourself up to other weaknesses when you do that. If you're and I know we were talking about this earlier about me going and challenging the poison gym leader, and I was like, oh, I need to harden myself and do this, and it was like that learning. It's like, why do you need to? You already have an advantage. If anything, they're the one that needs to be thinking about this. How would you worry about the stuff that's outside the box? Have you ever thought that they might have a different typing? That what if there was like a fire poison there? Have you considered what you'll do if you're actually fighting your weakness? And I honestly hadn't, because I was so fixated on a very narrow thought process. And so as a steel type, you need to have an open mind and realize that things can go not your way. Yes, you're hardy. Yes, you're resilient. Yes, you can pretty much get tossed in any situation, and you can probably do really well. It's just you got to expect the times that you're not prepared, and how you're going to overcome, and are you going to overcome it quickly, because time is everything. Because the longer it takes you to adjust, the longer you expose your weakness, and therefore you're not really capitalizing on the fact that of what makes you so strong.
I
Yes.
will say, just throw out a question here, just because I asked it for rock types before, but what types do you think steel types generally get along with?
Fighting.
Most definitely.
Most definitely. There's the obvious answer. I'm not even going to try to give any other answer for it. Fighting types are all about self-improvement. Steel types are about self-improvement with their own boundaries. You put those 2 Pokemon together, those 2 typings together, and you're going to get 2 Pokemon that can bounce off each other well. And you get 2 Pokemon that can be like, okay, I want to improve and you want to improve. Let's work together to make the best of this situation. You just can't get a better matchup than that, honestly.
The way that I would define it is that you have a steel type that tries to self-improve and be the best they can in their own boundaries, where a fighting type is trying to self-improve and expand their boundaries. And so you have the steel type that makes it so they can be the best in what they have, whereas the fighting type is to be the best and expand what they don't have. And so you end up getting a really good team just pushing forward, becoming ever more stronger, slowly, steadily, and not only that, being very effective once you've gained that strength. You have a complete awareness of how to, deal with what you have and what you can do at your disposal and things like that.
Expertly said. Expertly said. All right, so I feel like we covered steel typing pretty well there, too. I feel like we've covered our 3 typings well. I feel like we've done the Earth a solid today.
God fucking damn it.
I mean, that was okay, I guess.
I'm not even proud of it, but that being said, I feel this whole video might be a bit stainless, if you know what I mean.
Wow. I didn't steal myself for this.
Oh, God, no, you did.
Pretty good.
But it's fine. We'll rock on without.
God, now I'm quaking in my boots.
Oh, God.
This is rolling down here really
I mean, that being
quick.
said, it's pretty late. You youngins, you might want to get off before you get grounded.
Well, I'm gonna go
Motherfucker.
die. I'll see you guys never.
This is just a mountain of terrible now.
Oh, my
God,
God.
it is.
Let's just bring this back to the grind and continue on with the video.
Damn it,
Oh,
Tristan.
God.
It's the
All
worst
right,
one.
all right. I'm going to end this before it gets even worse.
Yeah, it's just a
I-
pitfall.
Oh,
For
fucking Lord.
So we've had Tom here today.
Thanks,
Oh,
Brink.
God.
Thanks,
I've been here with Lavix,
What's up?
Tristan,
See it.
Denise,
I promise these puns will never be as horrific again.
Oh, yes, they
that's a
will.
lie,
I'll fucking try.
Brigadoon,
See you later, guys.
and the non-question asking Little David.
But, I mean, I don't really have any questions about the Earth. I mean, I consider myself a pretty grounded person as it is.
God.
Long care, don't care. And I've been your host and DM, Tom. We'll see you next time.
Deal yourself for more videos.